Take a look at the device you're using to watch this explainer right now. Whether it's the smartphone sitting right there in your hand or the monitor on your desk, its beating heart actually comes from one specific, highly contested place on Earth. Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're going to uncover the incredibly high-stakes reality of what is arguably the most important island on the planet. We're looking at a literal microscopic fortress that is, no joke, holding the entire global economy together. I'm super thrilled you're here, because this isn't just about tech. It's a story of desperate history, mind-blowing engineering, and a modern survival strategy that literally dictates the fate of every single one of us. Here's our quick roadmap for today. We'll kick things off with the global choke point, then dive into a history of survival. Check out Forging the Silicon Shield, break down the logic of attrition, and wrap up with cracks on the fortress. Let's get right into it. Starting off with Section 1, the global choke point. We really need to dive into this catastrophic what-if scenario that's just kind of hanging over our modern world right now. Think about the sheer massive scale of our modern world for a second. Now, realize that a single island, an island actually smaller than the state of West Virginia, effectively holds what you might call a divine mandate over the entire global economy. And by divine mandate, I mean absolute, undisputed authority over the literal lifeblood of the modern age. I mean, imagine if the factories on this tiny piece of land just stopped humming for, say, 1 week. The cascading failure would be almost apocalyptic. Picture it. Global shipping logistics completely freezing up in their ports, assembly lines for advanced fighter jets just grinding to a halt, the production of life-saving hospital ventilators stopping literally overnight. Even the massive cloud servers powering the internet would hit a terrifying bottleneck. We're not just talking about a little disruption in trade or a temporary price spike here. We are looking at a completely new kind of fortress that is standing between everyday order and a total global economic collapse. You know, throughout history, nations survive sieges by building massive, intimidating physical barriers. You can almost feel the imposing weight of the Middle Ages, right? Kings building these concentric castles with layer upon layer of thick, impenetrable stone and deep trenches of water, all designed to just break the will of an invading army. Then, jump forward to the 19th century. Great Britain relied on its famous wooden walls, this staggering, thunderous fleet of 140 heavily armed ships of the line, projecting power across the oceans. But today, this island relies on a defense system that is entirely invisible to the naked eye. It's the silicon shield, and it's constructed entirely of microscopic circuits. It's actually mind-blowing when you really think about it. Instead of relying on brute force and heavy stone, they've engineered this hyper-advanced, incredibly delicate technical barrier that holds the world's economy in a highly suspenseful balance. All right, let's move to Section 2, a history of survival. We're going to see how this whole thing builds from a desperate historical retreat into a highly calculated strategy. To truly grasp why this island is so incredibly vital today, we have to look back at how they actually got backed into a corner in the first place. Picture the sheer desperation back in 1949, right in the middle of the brutal fallout of a civil war. Nationalist leader Chiang Kai-shek and 2 million of his followers fled across the sea, retreating to this single island. Fast forward just a bit to the 1950s, and the tension in the strait was essentially a powder keg. It nearly triggered a global nuclear crisis that was only deterred by the massive, intimidating arrival of the U.S. 7th Fleet. So for decades, their survival relied purely on military defense, geographic isolation, and the backing of foreign allies. But you know, they were outmatched both geographically and numerically. They knew that couldn't last forever. So in the late 20th century, we see one of the absolute most brilliant geopolitical pivots in history. They realized their ultimate survival strategy wasn't just armed resistance anymore. It was industrial indispensability. It was basically a checkmate move. They decided to make themselves so essential that the entire world simply couldn't afford to let them fall. Which brings us to Section 3, Forging the Silicon Shield. Let's look at the actual construction of this modern marvel. We're stepping into the modern Venetian arsenal of the 21st century now. These super factories, like TSMC, act as modern-day impregnable keeps. When we compare historical war machines to a modern 3-nanometer chip foundry, you really see just how dramatically the theater of power has shifted. On one side, look at the HMS Victory, an absolute masterpiece of physical engineering, built with the sweat and sawdust of 6,000 trees and held together by 26 miles of heavy rope. Now, contrast that with a modern semiconductor foundry. I want you to picture a vast, windowless room bathed in this very specific, eerie yellow light. Inside, the workers are sealed in full-body bunny suits just to prevent a single skin cell from escaping. The machines in there operate with such mind-boggling precision that they literally have to be isolated from the tiniest seismic vibrations of the Earth. In this environment, a single, invisible speck of dust is deadly. It can cause more catastrophic damage to the production of the world's most critical assets than a 32-pounder cannonball ever could to the wooden hull of a galleon. It is an absolute high-wire act of microscopic engineering. Okay, moving to Section 4, the logic of attrition. The crucial point here is how this incredible technological dominance actually translates into a defensive shield. Let's unpack this really grim but fascinating concept known as the logic of attrition. This is a strategy where a target is made so incredibly vital that attacking it guarantees impossibly high, mutually assured economic devastation. To really understand this, we can look back at the horrific Battle of Verdun in World War I. There, German General Falkenhayn's strategy wasn't actually about taking territory. It was about picking a target of such immense, unyielding symbolic importance to the French that they would willingly feed their entire army into a meat grinder just to defend it. Well, Taiwan has essentially reversed Falkenhayn's grim math. By establishing a total monopoly on the advanced technology that powers our modern world, they made themselves the overwhelmingly precious target. But here's the twist. The cost of attacking them means plunging the attacker's own economy straight back into the Dark Ages. They brilliantly turned their own indispensability into a weapon of mass deterrence. And that creates a pretty terrifying reality: the global meat grinder. Think about it historically. Empires like the Abbasids controlled the physical routes of the Silk Road, which meant they controlled the wealth, the trade, and the power of the entire known world. Today, this single island has become the absolute choke point of the modern electronic Silk Road. They're the node that every piece of data, every modern military, and every financial institution relies on. A conflict in the Taiwan Strait wouldn't just be some localized naval battle consuming ships and soldiers. It would act like a massive black hole, instantly swallowing the entire global supply chain. It's a defense mechanism built on the terrifying promise that if the fortress falls, the entire modern world burns right along with it. Which brings us to our final section, Section 5, Cracks in the Fortress. Because just as the invention of gunpowder eventually shattered the perfect medieval castle, rapid geopolitical shifts are threatening this modern fortress today. Global superpowers are incredibly acutely aware of this vulnerability, and because of that, we're now watching a frantic, massive structural shift in global manufacturing. Both the US and China are pouring hundreds of billions of dollars into a desperate race to build their own domestic foundries, trying to break free from their dependency on this single island. This is an arms race that perfectly mirrors the famous dreadnought buildup right before World War I. Back then, nations panicked, emptying their treasuries to build massive steel battleships out of sheer fear of losing naval supremacy. Today, the weapons have changed. Superpowers aren't racing to build steel hulls anymore. They're racing to build hyper-sterile silicon foundries. And it's all driven by the profound existential terror of being cut off from the electronic lifeblood of the 21st century. This leads us into a highly suspenseful global dynamic. There was a brief historical window in the 1920s, often called the spirit of Locarno, where global leaders and everyday citizens actually believed major devastating wars were finally a thing of the past. But as that spirit fades in our modern era, we're witnessing a very delicate pressure cooker balancing act of internal pacification and external resistance. The frantic modernization by rival superpowers, the shifting of military alliances, and the unbelievable amount of money being spent means that this seemingly impenetrable technological fortress is facing crushing pressure from all sides. Without taking any political sides here, we are objectively watching the shaping of paths that could very well lead to a devastating global collision. Which leaves us staring at this final, incredibly weighty question to ponder. Is this fragile, microscopic fortress the ultimate strategic masterpiece, an epic tale of a small island securing its survival through sheer industrial genius and indispensability? Or is the modern world's massive dependence on this single, earthquake-prone, politically contested island a terrifying miscalculation just waiting to shatter, potentially plunging the global economy into a century of humiliation? It really is the ultimate high-wire act of geopolitics and engineering. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep questioning the invisible structures that hold our fragile world together, and I highly encourage you to keep diving into the fascinating mechanics of our modern age. See you next time.